Hi there. I would like to talk about something that's a little bit different than what you would normally find on this channel, which of course is anatomy and physiology, endocrinology, ecology, those types of topics. In this video and in future videos, I would like to talk about poison. What's playing on the screen right now is a clip from what I first remember as my first perceptions of poisons. Of course, this is a clip from Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. This poisoned apple is being created to essentially hurt the protagonist. And so there's this malevolent motivation behind this action. And so very early on, I came to associate poison with evil. And so in this series of videos, I would like to first define what a poison is. Okay, like what makes this chemical a poison and that chemical not a poison? Why are there poisons to begin with? Okay, so of course, the evil witch here has created a poison for her own selfish gain because she has hatred for the protagonist, Snow White. But there are many examples of poison in nature where organisms are just trying to live their best life, essentially. So why are poisons found in nature? How do they come to be there? And from there, I'd like to talk a lot about how humans have used poisons, both for evil purposes, such as in here in Snow White, but also for good, how we can use sometimes literally the same chemicals to kill, but also to cure, right? Or to have some kind of ritual, or to have some sort of extracurricular experience. And also how certain substances that humans have made to essentially make our lives easier, to make it more fulfilling, how sometimes those products can become poison. And exactly what do those chemicals do in the environment, to humans, to people of different socioeconomic statuses? And so I would invite you to ponder what you think of when you hear the word poison. I, of course, think of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, but then so many other things. In fact, these videos are, of course, through the lens of my own experience. And so that is how you are approaching this content and how I am presenting it to you. In general, we have all learned about poisons in many different ways. And on a regular basis, we are taking in more information about poisons, whether or not we think about these events as being poisons. And so, for example, we get a lot of stories about poison in the news, in the media. So sometimes there are accidental poisonings when some kind of benign product, right, juice boxes or pizza, accidentally is poisoned and has to be recalled to protect people. Poisonings happen in real life. It's not just in cartoons. Sometimes poisons can be used for some type of protest, some sort of social statement. We see our peers or individuals on social media experiencing poisons as well. And in this case, a woman killed a boy who was in competition with her daughter. So lots of poisoning stories are in the news. And of course, sometimes we are exposed to poisons in kind of a silly way as well. In culture, we often acquire similar views to our peers on topics such as poison. For example, in ancient China, there was this feeling of danger associated with the 5th day of the 5th month, so May 5th. And the reason why, as a culture, this day was considered to be so dangerous is because it marks the beginning of the summer, which is a time when poisonous insects emerge, right? And venomous snakes are going to emerge as well. And so there's a lot more dangers associated with the summer, which began in that society on May 5th. And so it was, or became, a tradition in ancient China to protect oneself from these dangers, from the spread of disease, from the evil spirits associated with this time of the year. And so the most common way was to drink abundant wine, which ironically, this particular type of wine contained arsenic, which is in fact a poison, but arsenic was considered to be an antidote against some of the evils from which people needed protection during the summer. Of course, not everybody could drink abundant enough wine, and so particularly children would wear these charms, these 5 poison charms around their neck, and they could also nail these charms around the gate to their homes to protect the entire domicile. So these charms always had 5 different animals on them. The exact identity of the animals varied a little bit, but in general, these 5 poisons were poisonous and venomous animals, such as snakes, centipedes, spiders. This is the 3-legged toad here, and sometimes tigers. And of course, tigers are not venomous. They don't synthesize any poison themselves, but once again, in Chinese culture, tigers are considered to be very powerful protectors. And so having a tiger on these 5 poison charms would offer an extra level of protection against the pending dangers. So ancient Chinese people, of course, had a very particular perception of poisons because of these traditions. Even today, the 5th day of the 5th month is recognized in China on May 5th. Every year is celebrated the Dragon Boat Festival, which of course has come to have many different traditions, such as these boat races here. But to this day, this 5 poisons concept is still maintained as part of this festival. Today, instead of officially drinking wine or wearing these charms, instead the 5 poisonous animals are cut out of paper and then hung around the home. In doing research for this video, for this class, it was pretty easy to find information on how different cultures view poison. However, when I Googled poison in American culture, I was somewhat surprised to see that for the most part, the first several pages of Google results were all about the toxic lifestyle of America and the toxic behaviors held by or practiced by American people. And so I thought it was worth presenting that in our culture, we don't really have this fear of the chemicals themselves at the front of our minds. We're not worried about, getting bitten by snakes and spiders or anything like that. As a culture, instead, we are more focused on poison as a metaphor, how different practices have become toxic, they have become damaging to us as a whole instead of our physiology. We have learned about poisons through literature. William Shakespeare was clearly a fan of using poisons, both physical poisons, so in Hamlet there's lots of poisonings happening, and also as a metaphor. I chose Macbeth because this scene happens to be one of my favorite of all of Shakespeare's plays, although hopefully in later videos we'll look at poison in other Shakespeare plays as well. But essentially this the scene is when 3 witches are gathered around a cauldron and they're just throwing in all sorts of stuff and they're chanting and they're, singing the recipe out loud, essentially, in hopes of ultimately using this practice to conjure up prophecies about Macbeth. Famous scene with double, double, toil and trouble. Okay. If you look through the ingredients they list, these ingredients aren't just included by Shakespeare because they rhyme or because they sound funny when they're chanted in this way, but a lot of these ingredients happen to be poisons, and so that just supports this concept of evil and this kind of motif of poison throughout the Macbeth family, and their motivation, like poisoning their morality, etc. And so, just as a couple of examples, the very first ingredient that is used is a toad they found under a rock. I wanted to throw it out there that toads, many toads, are in fact poisonous. Here are these glands, which are similar to our salivary glands. And parotid glands are used by the toads to create a poison. And so when your dog, crunches down on the toad, yay, he got it. He essentially squeezes these glands and a poison is emitted. Another ingredient used by the witches is tooth of wolf, which is essentially referring to wolfsbane. This is not only a real flower, but it's also used as another, in other types of literature, as a weapon against werewolves. Okay. Root of hemlock, digged in the dark. Poison hemlock, of course, a very poisonous plant, as the name suggests. And finally, slips of yew. The yew plant is toxic to animals as well. The name for yew in Latin is actually used to, or as a root for a lot of the terms associated with toxicology. So really, a lot of poison is within Macbeth, and of course other literature, even if you didn't realize before. Okay, myths and legends. In addition to literature and stories, myths and legends are unique because they are often coalesced around some kind of a core historical event or understanding of science or phenomena around. So I wanted to first bring up some Greek mythology. Hercules, okay, ultimately was charged with completing a variety of tasks, one of which was killing Hydra, this monster, as you can see down here, with lots of heads. You cut off one head, lots more heads appear. Kind of like poison, in fact, and one little bit of poison can ultimately produce a lot more ramifications than you would expect, which is in fact what happens in these myths. Anyway, Hercules kills Hydra. He loves to essentially take some trophies. Here we can see a trophy from a previous battle won. From Hydra, what he takes is its venom. So he takes his arrowheads, which were gifted to him by Apollo, dips them in the venom, and now he has a doubly lethal weapon, right? So essentially, a biological weapon. Okay. And so at first, these arrows, these poison arrows, really help him out. In the next labor, the next task that he's charged to do, he ultimately kills the giant boy, and with his poison arrows, right? So success, these poison weapons are helping him out. And so in a way, the Greeks believe that yes, these are wildly powerful weapons, but at what cost? Ultimately, Hercules' use of these poison arrowheads would ultimately unleash this chain reaction where he had tragedy after tragedy as a result of these weapons. For example, he went to a party by his friend Pholus, or hosted by his friend Pholus. During the party, this gang of centaurs comes in. There's a scuffle. Right? Hercules defends his friends and the other partygoers by releasing a bunch of arrows, kills a bunch of centaurs. Centaurs race away and hide in Chiron's and other friends' cave for protection. Hercules pursues and unleashes even more arrows into Chiron's cave. Now, because it's dark and he doesn't see, he ultimately nicks the knee of his friend Chiron. And a normal arrow would have just would have been a little scratch. But because this was a poison arrow, Chiron ultimately ends up in excruciating pain, so much so that he begs to die, which of course is a problem because he is immortal. And so, long story short, he ultimately gives his immortality to Prometheus, who also regrets having immortality later on, if you remember the story. But Chiron dies as a result of these poisoned arrows. Meanwhile, all the stuff's going on with Chiron. Pholus is back at his party and he's looking around at all of these corpses that were felled by Hercules' poison arrows, and he picks the arrow up out of one of the corpses, and he's looking at it and kind of having a moment of, like, wow, how did this tiny little thing cause so much destruction? In the process of having this moment, he accidentally drops the arrow onto his foot. So again, if this was a normal arrow, no big deal, right? He might get stabbed by the arrow, but no big deal, pull it out and he will heal. But because this was a poison arrow, Pholus too was poisoned, and he ultimately ended up in excruciating pain and died himself. And so we see that, yes, these weapons are super powerful, but they come at the cost of, collateral damage, right? His friends. And kind of as the most ironic twist of fate here, later, Hercules' wife, Deianira, is kidnapped by another centaur. And as Hercules comes to save her, shoots the centaur with a poison arrow as the centaur is laying there dying, again in awful pain, which is another theme that we see over and over again through this myth. The centaur convinces Hercules' wife that his blood would ultimately be a love potion for Deianira later on. And so Deianira takes the blood into a jar, she seals it up, she puts it away out of the light, out of the heat, and saves it for later. When she, in trying to do a good thing, trying to do a thing out of love, she treats Hercules's garments with this poisoned blood. She has no idea that it's still poisonous, but when Hercules, goes to this ceremony, he approaches the fire, which kind of activates the poison within the blood. And so the scene is, graphically depicted in a play by Sophocles. Hercules is in awful burning pain. He's like ripping trees out of the ground and screaming for somebody to just make a fire so that he can put himself out of his misery. So once again, we see that pain and burning and fire just comes up again and again in these myths in relation to these poison arrows. And so it's clear that the ancient Greeks were very familiar with this type of weapon, that they knew that, being poisoned by venom would produce this burning sensation and victims would pray for death. Ultimately, Hercules elected to die by fire, again, to put himself out of his enemies. And so we can learn a lot about what the ancients knew about poisons and, learn about them ourselves by reading these myths. Another example from Greek mythology, the Cyclops. I'm going to bring this one up because once again, myths and legends are often based in some kind of history, some sort of actual science. And so the Cyclops, of course, this creature with only a single eye, was actually based on real life experiences. A plant called hellebore was used by pregnant women to reduce their nausea and morning sickness. The problem is that another plant, which looks very similar to this helpful plant, has a lot of poison. There's cyclopamine, which of course is named for Cyclops. And essentially, if pregnant women were to consume the false plant as opposed to the true plant, it would result in birth defects. One of the more common birth defects is having a single large eye. And so it is likely that this myth of the Cyclops was largely based on fear of individuals with a birth defect due to consuming the wrong plant, mom consuming the wrong plant during pregnancy. And so really interesting perspective on on poisons there. Final example is a legend in Argentina, La Luz Mala, so the bad or the evil light. And so it is known by people in Argentina that once in a while in the countryside there is a light, kind of wisps around it, a couple different colors of light depending on the legends, but wispy light in the countryside. And within this light is emitted poisonous gases. So if you are to approach this light, you can become poisoned and die as well. Also, some accounts claim that there are screams of pain and terror associated with this wispy light as well. And so it is thought that this wispy light, this bad light, is essentially a collection of lost souls who, for whatever reason, did not get a proper burial. And so they are remaining here as opposed to moving on to whatever is after this life, in order to protect their lost possessions. And so if you go back during the day to that same spot where the Luz Mala was, the light and the poison will be gone, and maybe you can find the lost soul's treasure in the same spot. Finally, probably what we have, or the media through which we have learned the most about poisons is film and television. And so I just want to play this as I'm talking here. To an old James Bond movie. We also have an example from, various detective shows, Hunger Games, right? The whole scene with the poison berries and everything. So we learn a lot about poisons through film and television. And so over these next videos, I hope to bring in clips from different shows, and we can look at poison from a variety of different cinematic lenses. Thank you so much for watching. I really look forward to talking to you a lot more about poison as we go forward.